It's so good to see everyone here this Father's Day. We know we've been out the last couple of weeks. Had vacation, went up and saw Jana. And let me tell you, Jana and Reese are doing better, gaining some weight, getting a little healthier. Still, Jana's very weak, but progressing along. And so keep her in your prayers. She's trying to get better enough to come down here this summer and see us, but she's progressing, and so it's looking good. This Father's Day, I got up in my closet, put on this Father's Day tie that the girls got me a long time ago. Some of you saw that. It has Looney Tunes on it. Not one I would have gotten, but they got it for me, so I'm wearing it. And I didn't know if they thought I was like Bugs Bunny or Daffy Duck, but looking more like Elmer Fudd, as I get older here. So I wear that for Father's Day. I had a great visit this past week. Happened to come in acquaintance with a schoolmate who's much older than I am. Went to school there at Genoa, and his grandkids are playing ball there at Genoa, and so we were talking about ball and coaches. It got around the coaches, And Buddy Ray, who participated in our gospel meeting last year, Buddy Ray is coaching at Genoa. And he was talking with this particular guy. He said, I bet y'all hadn't had a Church of Christ preacher out here. And this guy said, oh, yes, we have, because Daddy taught school out there and preached. He said, we had the best. Boy, it made me swell up with pride to hear that, from one who was a student there and then served on the school board with Daddy later on. And so he knew Daddy pretty well to tell someone else, we had the best. Well, I was swelling up with pride about my daddy. He started to tell different stories about Daddy and school and relationship with kids. He said, he'd help anyone, treat everyone the same and such. But, he said, I had him right before lunch. And some of those days we'd go up to Mr. Munn. They'd call him Mr. Munn. Mr. Munn, Miss Munn. That's what they called Mom and Daddy out at Genoa. Spell it M-U-N, Munn. Mr. Munn. We go up to Mr. Munn and say, they're having beans and cornbread in the cafeteria for lunch today. We could get out a little early. Daddy said, okay. So he'd be teaching class in about 10 minutes till. He said, y'all, I think that's enough. We'll go eat that beans and cornbread. Let them out a little early. He said one time, this girl, Daddy taught business, bookkeeping, typing, shorthand. This girl said, your daddy helped me cheat in class. And I thought, that is not Daddy. He didn't let anyone cheat. You didn't do that. And so I just, perked up my interest. What she's saying, because I know she's telling the truth with it, telling me a good story about Daddy. Your daddy let me cheat in typing class. He'd come to me. He said, now, Sonny, I didn't mean to say her name. Y'all might know her. He'd come over and say, we're having a test on page 65 on typing. You get started right now. So she get started. And I can see Daddy doing that. If someone was doing the best they can and doing all that they can, I could see him going to her and saying, hey, in a few minutes, it was a time test too, and so he'd let her get a little head start so she would do well on the test. I could see that. Like, your daddy let me cheat on tests. And so I was thinking about Daddy, and so today's lesson is lessons I learned from Dad. And just different things that from growing up and just remembering through, Daddy passed away 20 years before Mama did. So I got to be with Mama a lot longer and have a lot more time with Mama because our kids had already left the house, and so we had time with Mama, but didn't have that with Daddy. But there are a lot of lessons. And number one, he'd say, take pride in who you are. And he'd always talk about, and I've said this before, Proverbs 22 verse 1 was one of Daddy's favorite verses. It said that a good name is to be chosen rather than great riches. And he'd talk about, you're a Mulholland. And Monhollands act certain ways and certain standards and things. And so he said, take pride in who you are. You're wearing a good name, the Monholland name. Now, we were new to Genoa. We moved into Genoa. We weren't a Pure Four or Johnson or others, that we have out there. And so we were the new people coming in from people who had lived there for ages and ages. And so as that, we were, how do we behave and such? And what about this name? And who is this Monholland group? There's 5 kids, and so they got used to us coming along pretty regularly. Your name. And so that was important to Daddy, that heritage of name. And then it was important also, I was a preacher's kid, and Daddy wouldn't tell me, well, you're a preacher's kid, so you got to behave. He would say, you're a Christian. And then wearing that name. And so to bring honor not only to our physical name that we had, but our spiritual name. When he would say, you need to behave yourself because you're a Christian. And that's what Christians do. And you're wearing the name of Christ. And so it is that take pride in who you are. I'm not ashamed to be called a Christian. And I'm proud of that. And I want to bring honor to that name. And so it is that I learned that from Daddy. Take pride in who you are. You're a Monholland. You're a Christian. And so he would go that. And then number 2 is treat everyone the same. Now, I just told a little story. He didn't treat everyone the same. He gave someone a little head start on the test, but he was just treating everyone the same. She needed a little head start. She's doing the best that she can. He wanted her to make a good grade and look at that. Treat everyone the same. If you were in Daddy's class as a school teacher, he didn't care if you were the governor's daughter or whoever in class. Everyone was treated the same. And it was. And he taught us that it doesn't matter where people come from or who they are or their heritage. You treat everyone the same. And James talks about that, isn't it? Whenever he talks about when someone comes among you and they are, wearing the rich clothing and whatever, and you say, hey, come and you sit up front in the place of honor. Someone who's not, they sit in the back. And James said, you ought not to treat people differently. And as it is the same with Christianity. That we treat everyone the same. We're all brothers and sisters in Christ and have that same honor and respect toward others. And so we treat everyone the same. And I've tried to do that in my life. Without respecter, God is no respecter of persons, it says. We ought not be respecter of persons in that. Treat everyone the same. Number 3, we get on the spiritual level, that sin separates us from God. That whenever he would say, you're a Christian, and that we ought to behave ourselves as Christians, and to realize that sin separates us from God. And to realize that there are certain people you ought not to be around because they can influence you. 1 Corinthians 15:33 says that evil companions corrupt good morals. And so, of course, out there in Genoa, you didn't hang around anyone and do anything that Mom and Daddy didn't know when you got back home. And we didn't even have Facebook at that time and our cell phones. And somehow or another, whatever you did in Texarkana got back to Genoa before you did. I don't know how it was, but it was. And so it is that what we do is sing. And affects your influence upon other people. That when you try to talk to people about salvation and Jesus and the church and the Bible, and you go out Friday night and go sin with them and then try to talk to them Saturday about coming to church on Sunday, it just doesn't work that way. Sin separates us from God. That's serious. Sin hurts our influence upon others, and that's serious. So whenever we talk about sin and trying to behave and trying to help us uh, take pride in who you are. Realize, Romans 6, verse 23, the wages of sin is death. I know that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and we understand that part too. But we need to realize the seriousness of sin. And we could preach a whole series of lessons on this. And whenever, teenagers, whenever you're out and you're sowing your wild oats, we've got some going off to college, and they're going to sow their wild oats, right? Mom and Daddy are back home. We don't know what they're going to do. They don't know where I am, what I'm going to do, and realize sin separates us from God. Now, you're making choices with consequences. Do I live a Christian life? Do I take pride in living a Christian life? Do I realize the seriousness of sin and the influence it has upon my life and in others' lives? Sin separates us from God. One of Daddy's favorite sayings is this next one. Said, you can always count on family. And the older I get, the more I have seen this through our particular immediate family. You can always count on family. Oh, that was something that Daddy took pride in, and family and helping one another, being there for one another in a physical sense. In a spiritual sense also. He would tell me, when we're traveling or whatever, of course, at a time when you didn't have cell phones and such, he would say, if you ever get in trouble, you can go to the Church of Christ and they'll help you. Always knew that, because that's family. And whatever it was, wherever you were never alone because you had family. And you can always count on family. And so as brothers and sisters in spiritual sense, and in the spiritual church it is that we are brothers and sisters together, we need to bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ, Galatians 6, verse 1. Lift each other up whenever we fall and pray for one another. Confess your faults one to another and pray for one another, James would say. You can always count on family to encourage you and help you and build you up. Let brotherly love continue, Hebrews 13, verse 1. And so it is. You can always count on family, and I've always had that sense of familyness with the church here at Hampton and wherever we've gone. I'm so glad to have had that. Daddy instilled that upon me. You can always count on family. And then the last one is that heaven is our home. We lived at different places growing up. Sometimes we'd live in Texarkana. We came to Texarkana because Mama's mother, Granny Collins, lived in Texarkana, and that's where Mama was raised. And Daddy took her off a little bit when they got married, but then we came back when I was about 4 or 5 years old, somewhere around in there. Lived in Texarkana, lived out at Genoa, moved back to Texarkana and lived a couple of places, moved back to Genoa. We had different houses until I got to be about 6th grade, and the house, the home place, where we go back to now. So from 6th grade on, we lived at that particular house. And so there was, growing up, I really didn't have a home that I would say, this that some of you, that's the only house you remember. Home, there's something special about home. Heaven is our home. And to never forget that. I like the little phrase that says, we're not citizens of this earth trying to get to heaven. We're citizens of heaven trying to get through this earth. And to realize that heaven is our home. And Paul talks about that we are citizens of heaven. Our citizenship is in heaven. And we're citizens of heaven. That's where our loyalty is. That's where our home is. And the older I get, the more real heaven is to me. And it's always been real. I've always had heaven and hell. I knew that God and the devil understood that. But the older I get, the more I realize heaven is my home, and this world is not my home. And we do things in this world, and love doing things in this world. But I want to go where Daddy is. I know He's in heaven. All the great promises. Mama's up there. You know, heaven is my home. I just thought of some things. I could go on with some lessons about that. I had some stories to share about that. Time's about up. Lessons I learned from Dad. That's what it is, fathers. We teach and admonish our children. Bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Remembering physical lessons and spiritual lessons. Remembering lessons I learned from Dad. Sometimes it is so much that it's not that Daddy would say, now, Jerry, sit down, I'm going to teach you a lesson. Not with any one of these. He didn't say, you know, I'm sit down, I'm going to tell you a lesson. He did it through just repetition. I tell you, treat everyone the same. I tell you a story. There was a family. The car broke down on the side of the road. It was dark. It was raining that night, and we stopped to help. You don't know what it is and whatever. It's a pickup, and anyway, we whatever it was, I was still in the car. I didn't get out. You know, I didn't want to get wet, whatever. And anyway, Daddy got out and helped the people. And it was that they went to, you know, trade shows and such, and they had for sale certain things, and they had a little plaster cast of a vase holder and they gave us a set of those. And they had little flowers you'd put in those. But those were set by our front door. And I thought about that every time I'd go in and out of the door. They're just right there. Help people when they need help. Treat everyone the same, it is. We never know who we're going to run across that needs help. So, fathers, we lead by example more than instruction and bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. We never know what memories are passed on to our children, what they'll hold on to. I don't know if these would be the lessons that Daddy would say, well, these are what I wanted you to learn when you were growing up. He could have had a whole different list. But this is what I learned. This is what I remember, and among some other things. Remember who you are. Remember your influence on others. Remember that sin separates us from God and that heaven is our home. Remember that you can always count on family with one another. We'll always have, you're not alone living the Christian life. Don't ever think you're alone. At any time, day or night, call me. Anyone here. You're not alone. Help one another through this world. Well, lessons from Dad. Happy Father's Day. We're thankful we have good, godly fathers. We look around and see the men who are the spiritual leaders of their household. So thankful for that. Just so glad that we as a nation set aside this day to honor our fathers. Thankful for your influence. Fathers, hang in there. That your influence continues from generation to generation. We'll close with the invitation. If you're subject to the invitation call, won't you come right now while we stand and while we sing?